Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, Fantasy Freaks and Geeks? This is part 3 of the Week 4 episode of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. We got all of the AFC Home games here on this part 3 episode. Sorry about this week. Had to chop it up a little bit more than we're used to, but we got everything we need for Week 4 here, starting here with the Chargers at the Dolphins. So this could be Austin Eckler's last game as the top dog, the top running back in Los Angeles. With Melvin Gordon returning this week, he probably won't play this week. Maybe may not even play next week. But he's back on the team, and they now are back into their rotation of 3 running backs. So I don't expect Gordon to jump right back into the featured role. I think Austin Eckler is going to maintain his receiving numbers. Still probably going to be targeted 5-6 times a game. So I think you can continue to play him for the next few weeks at least until we see how they're going to distribute these touches once Melvin Gordon is back into his normal workload. Keenan Allen with 42 targets in the first 3 games is absolutely absurd. No Hunter Henry, still a limited Mike Williams. You know, they're still dealing without Melvin Gordon. So this week, I think we could see another huge day from Keenan Allen, especially considering the Dolphins allow the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers right now. On the Dolphins side, the Dolphins are just bad. Honestly, I think the only guy worth playing is maybe Preston Williams in a full-point PPR, considering he got 12 targets last week. Maybe Kenyon Drake, he's starting to pick it back up a little bit. He was given 12 carries last week. He was targeted 6 times. So if he's going to get the touches, he's probably the most talented guy on that team right now, or at least on the offense. So, if you're somebody that drafted him and you're maybe starting to deal with these bye weeks, maybe he's worth playing. If he's going to get 18 touches, it's not the worst play in the world. Moving on to the Patriots at the Bills. This is 2 really good defenses playing each other, both coming off of wins last week. Brady left the game up big last week against the Jets. The Pats brought in the backup, and he threw a pick 6. And what do you know? Brady comes right back into the game. He ended up throwing the ball 42 times. With Edelman going down with a chest injury, Gordon led the team with 11 targets. Dorsett had another touchdown. And Rex Burkhead led the team in touches again. Actually, I think this was the second week out of the 3 where he led the team in touches with 17. Sonny Michel's somewhat struggling. Last week, 9 carries for 11 yards, and he's not used in the pass game. So if he's not going to pick it up running the ball here, maybe we see Rex Burkhead eat into that workload a little bit more than we were expecting him to. I know the Pats have been ahead in all these games, so maybe that's why we're seeing a little bit more of Rex Burkhead than we expected. But the Pats are going to attack your weakness, and if the Bills have one weakness, it's the pass-catching running backs. They're allowing the most receptions to running backs and the 3rd most receiving yards to running backs. It's kind of trend with these really good defenses is that the quarterback ends up having to just dump the ball off to these running backs because everybody else is covered. So last week we did not have James White on the field. He was I think his wife was giving birth or something. So he's probably going to come back, and if that is a weakness that the Patriots can exploit, then it's going to be James White doing that. So on the other side of the ball, the Pats have allowed the fewest fantasy points so far to quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. They've had a pretty easy schedule so far, but still, it's probably going to be tough sledding for these Bills. I expect the Pats to focus on keeping Josh Allen in the pocket, so we won't see him running around making all those crazy plays, buying time and all that. So I expect a low rush game from Josh Allen, somebody that I've actually played for the last 2 weeks in a league where I kind of missed out on quarterbacks on draft day. I'm probably going to end up streaming somebody else this week because you just don't play young quarterbacks against the Patriots. It usually doesn't end well for you. They're going to need this rookie Devin Singletary this game. They'll need his versatility because you're not going to beat the Patriots with Frank Gore as as the guy leading your team in touches. We saw the Bills really spread the ball around last week. There were 6 different players that had at least 3 targets, so probably no huge game for any one guy in this game particularly. I don't know if the Patriots really have a weakness on their defense. We saw Cole Beasley get 10 targets last week, so if that's someone that Josh Allen has become comfortable with, he was able to catch 8 of them for 48 yards. So in a PPR league, that's not a bad game at all. Maybe he's somebody worth throwing at the end of your bench and seeing if it continues. Next, we got the Raiders going to play the Colts. Raiders coming off of that ugly loss to the Vikings 34-14, and the Colts with a nice win against the Falcons 27-24. The Raiders were kind of forced to throw the ball in a bad game script for Josh Jacobs, who only had 10 carries. The fewest touches he's had all season so far, and he was dealing with I think it was an ankle injury, so kind of makes sense why we saw his usage go down a little bit. But the story in this game, at least for the Raiders last week, was Darren Waller. He caught 13 of 14 targets for 134 yards. The Vikings have a really good defense, but maybe attacking them up the middle with your tight end is the way to go. So maybe we'll see these tight ends for the Colts do something good. Almost half of Derek Carr's throws went to Darren Waller, so he's definitely becoming someone that they're going to focus on in the Raiders' offense here, especially if Tyrell Williams' hip pointer continues to nag at him. One thing here, maybe I was a little too high on Hunter Renfrow to start the season because in a game, like I said, where Tyrell Williams was a little injured, Josh Jacobs wasn't really used as much, and yet Renfrow was only targeted 4 times, one less than J.J. Nelson, who ended up getting a touchdown as well. So maybe I was a little too high on that guy. As far as the Colts go, Marlon Mack with another great game. He was dealing with an injury, yet he still got 18 touches, gave you 74 yards and a touchdown. Plus another, 2 catches for 14 yards, extra couple points there. T.Y. With more than twice the amount of targets as the next, which was actually the pair of tight ends. We each got 4. T.Y. had 10. T.Y. had another touchdown, but now he's dealing with an injury himself. So if T.Y. Hilton misses, I'm probably going to get these tight ends in my lineup any way I can. I'm in a full-point PPR league where I'm dealing with the loss of Hunter Henry for another couple weeks. And if T.Y. Hilton's out, I'm hitting the waiver wire and I'm picking up Jack Doyle. 4 catches for 46 yards last week. If there's no T.Y. there, you got to figure both of these tight ends will probably be targeted 6-7 times. So in DFS, I think they're also great plays because they're probably not all that expensive. Actually, like I said earlier, with what Darren Waller did to the Vikings last week, you see what a good tight end can do for you in the middle of the field. So I'm definitely excited to play one of these Colt tight ends if in fact T.Y. does miss. Moving on to an AFC North game, the Browns at the Ravens last week. Jarvis had 9 targets, which was the most he's had all season, but he only caught a third of them. With no David Njoku, Landry probably stands to benefit the most. In fact, I think he's leading the team in red zone targets so far. But he's got to catch more than 3 of 9 passes if he wants to stay fantasy relevant. Nick Chubb will get his opportunity in this game to really show what he can do. Very tough matchup with the Ravens, at least against the run, who only allow the seventh fewest fantasy points to running backs, but they also allow the 3rd most catches and the most receiving yards to running backs. So again, here's another good defense that seems to give up the production to these pass-catching running backs. So look for Nick Chubb to be used a lot more in the passing game this game. It's a big test for Baker Mayfield. They're, I think, what are they, 2-2 or 1-3 right now? If they lose this game, it's going to turn into a circus, even more than it already is in Cleveland. But Ingram with 3 touchdowns last week, and of course he was sitting on my bench. It's all good. I still won that week, but we're seeing the threat of the running QB really benefit Mark Ingram so far this year, over 100 total yards in each of the 3 games. Again, almost 40% of Lamar Jackson's 43 passes went to his tight ends, Andrews, Boyle, and Hurst. They're really building something there, the tight ends and the quarterback relationship. And then Marquise Brown, 2 straight weeks as the target leader on the team. Somewhat disappointing output last week in what I thought it was going to be a high-scoring game, but he only had 2 catches on his 9 targets. And he's got another tough matchup here against the Browns, who actually are allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers so far. So we'll see how that pans out for the Ravens there. Next, we got the Carolina Panthers at the Houston Texans. Both of these teams coming off of a win. Kyle Allen stepped in for Cam Newton. This dude was an undrafted free agent, and he had a huge day. I know it was against the horrible Cardinals, but he threw 4 touchdowns. It's not easy. They really relied on McCaffrey and the veteran tight end Greg Olsen, 11 targets between the two of them, which was almost half of the target share. Kyle Allen only threw 26 passes, so interesting to me to see how Kyle Allen only looked DJ Moore's way twice. Yeah, one of them was for a touchdown, but Curtis Samuels was targeted 7 times, so we'll have to see what happens with that in Week 4 to see if there's anything developing there between Samuel and Kyle Allen, and maybe not so much with Moore. The Texans, Hopkins with back-to-back games of 7 and 8 targets, which is very strange. We're gotten used to seeing him get double-digit targets pretty much every week. And he's got a tough matchup with the Panthers, who are allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers so far. But I think maybe the Texans are going to say, yeah, we can't get away from this guy. Yeah, I know we brought on some other talent. They bring in Duke Johnson and Carlos Hyde and Kenny Stills, but DeAndre Hopkins is still the man there. So their tight end, Jordan Atkins, had 2 touchdowns last week. Don't be chasing after those points. I don't expect that to happen again. This team hasn't really used their tight end all that much over the past few years, so I don't expect that to become anything that we see in any frequency at all. We got the Jaguars playing the Broncos here. Gardner Minshew with another pretty good game. Completed 66% of his passes, had 2 touchdowns. Fournette, though, had a total of negative 6 yards before that big 60-whatever yard run it was at the end of the game. They were really the Titans, that is, were really kind of bottling him up there and kind of forcing Minshew to make the plays, and he kind of did. Fournette has seen a stacked box every single time he's on the field so far, but he is being used in the pass game, which is nice. 6 catches on 8 targets for 26 yards last week, so although he's kind of not giving you what you expected in the run game, he is making up for it in the pass game, at least in PPR leagues, where you get those extra 4 or 5 points. DJ Shark was 3rd on the team in targets, but he had the red zone look, and he got a touchdown. It was him and James O'Shaughnessy, the tight end, the guys who did the scoring for him last week against the Titans. They didn't really have to do much on offense considering the Jags defense just beat the hell out of the Titans offensive line. So with Dede continuing to get like 7-8 targets a game, and Shark being, seems to be the guy that they look for first, I think they're both kind of considered flex options, but it's really going to come down to whether or not Gardner Minshew can maintain both of these wide receivers. Obviously his value is very much tied to these two wide receivers. So it's something, don't just look at the numbers for these two guys. You got to watch these games and figure out whether or not Gardner Minshew is really favoring one over the other. On the Broncos side, this O-line better show up. Like I said last week, the Jags sacked Marcus Mariota 9 times, and now they come to Denver with an extra 3 days of rest, so they've been off for 10 days. I expect another game plan centered around the run. Last week we saw Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman have 36 carries between the two of them. And probably they would have run more if they weren't losing. But these two RBs are clearly the centerpieces of this offense. Both of them were even targeted 5 times. So they are the guys that they want to get the ball to. And that's the way it is. So I think Jaguars are going to have a pretty good game here. I don't like how this matchup goes in the way of the Broncos, really, in any point or any matchup on the field there, really. So with the last game here on part 3, it is the Bengals at the Steelers, another AFC North matchup. Both teams coming off of a loss. The Bills D really showed up last week against the Bengals. They held the big play threat, John Ross, to only 2 catches on 6 targets for 22 yards. Yeah, he had a couple drops, but this Bills defense is pretty legit. Mixon looked healthy enough. He got 17 touches, and he's got a good matchup against the Steelers here. They're allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. So another week to feel confident about starting Mixon. He's going to get the touches, and he's got the good matchup. These wide receivers also have a good matchup, actually. Boyd and Ross and Tate. The Steelers are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So Steelers defense not looking all that great so far this year. Maybe the Bengals come in and exploit them for that. On the Steelers side of the ball, this game should also be good for the Steelers running backs. The Bengals are not all that great against running backs either. They're allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs total. They're also allowing the 2nd most receiving yards and the 9th most receptions to running backs. So I expect to see James Conner used a lot more in the passing game. He was targeted 5 times last week to go with his 13 carries. So, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him get, closer to 20, 21, 22 maybe touches, especially with Vance McDonald possibly missing this game. The Steelers did just go out and trade for the Seahawks backup tight end, so I don't know if they're going to just throw him in and give him a bunch of targets. So with what the Bengals have put on tape last year and this year so far, they're not all that great at covering running backs coming out of the backfield. So again, I expect James Conner to have a nice game. Juju has, put up his numbers, but he hasn't had that big game yet. So maybe this is the one. Maybe this turns into a high-scoring game because, like I said, both of these defenses are not all that great. So that's going to do it for part 3. Those are the AFC home games for week 4. One last thing here. We got to get in Chris Navarra's 3-team parlay of the week. It's been a crazy week for me, so I wasn't able to get him on the phone at any point, but I do have his picks here right in front of me, so I'm going to give them to you right now. So he's got the Chiefs -6 against the Lions. He just sees that Chiefs defense kind of has an unstoppable defense, the Chiefs offense kind of unstoppable right now. They're playing inside. That bodes well for these the speed of these wide receivers on the Chiefs. The next one is he's got the Rams -9.5 versus the Buccaneers. He thinks this Rams defense is going to force Winston into a bunch of turnovers, put some pressure on him. So he likes the Rams at home minus 9.5. And the last, and he's taking an underdog here. He's got the Saints getting 2.5 points at home against Dallas. In Chris's eyes, Dallas hasn't played anybody good, and he's kind of right. They've played the Giants, Redskins, and Dolphins so far this season. So Chris thinks, after what this Saints did last week in Seattle, kind of showed that their offense is still one of the top offenses in the league, even without their Hall of Fame quarterback, and going up against this Dallas defense that hasn't really been tested at all this season so far. So he likes the home team getting points there. So the Week 4 3-team parlay is the Chiefs minus 6, the Rams minus 9.5, and the Saints plus 2.5. So good luck, and hopefully this one hits for us. Hopefully our DFS lineup of the week hits for us. It's been pretty bad luck so far going into Week 4 here. So that does it. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check us out next week for the Week 5 edition of Beers and Bruiser Fantasy Football Podcast. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.